So in today's video, we're going to be talking about how graphic design and photography link, how they overlap, how they are related, and more specifically, how you as a photographer can use graphic design to help your business. So a few months back, I posted a video and I was talking, I think, about, my experience at uni, how I am just finishing my graphic design degree. And I had a comment that kind of threw me back a bit, and the comment kind of suggested to me, why are you wasting your time creating a channel about photography when you study graphic design? If you were, if you're actually passionate, if you actually enjoy design, then you would make a channel about graphic design, not photography. And I think really what that comment did was it made me very aware of how people aren't very clear on how graphic design and photography work in unison, are related, or have a shared set of principles. So if you guys have followed this channel for a while, or followed me on Instagram or whatever, then you'll probably be aware that I have no formal education in photography. At my school, the GCSEs were art and design. There weren't like specific like photography, for example. And then when I went to college, I studied graphic design. And then when I went to uni, I also studied graphic design. So my actual photography knowledge has kind of come from the principles, which I will speak about later on in this video, that I learned from graphic design, but also just from practicing and teaching myself how to use a camera. So we are going to split this video up into 3 sections. We're going to be talking about how graphic design and photography work in unison. We're going to be talking about the shared principles of graphic design and photography. And then we are finally going to be talking about how, as a photographer, you can use graphic design in your practice. If you guys caught my video last week or the week before about color theory, I'll link it here if you've not checked it out. I had a lot of messages from the back of that video saying that you kind of want more content like that, and more content that maybe people don't necessarily talk about when they talk about how to become a photographer. So this is kicking off a new series on my channel where we're going to be focusing on design fundamentals and specifically how you can use design as a photographer in your practice. I'll still be posting stuff that's not related to design. It's just going to be, increasing the output on this channel. What better time to do it than in a global pandemic? So the first section of the video, how do photography and graphic design work in unison? So when I think about how graphic design and photography work in unison, one of the first things that come to my mind is editorial design. So when I talk about editorial design, I'm talking about, magazines, photo books, that sort of thing. There are a lot of magazines out there that design really focuses on the photography. So if we take, for example, Crack magazine, if you guys have not checked that out, I will link it in the description, but I'll also have some examples on the screen. Crack magazine is a great magazine when we're talking about photography. It features large, bold imagery, and often a lot of the design elements link to the photographs. So for example, they might take a specific color from a photograph and then use the type or the lines or the shapes on the other page with the text or the interview or whatever, and they'll use that color and use it within that design. Another thing, like a lot of magazines, they have a bold center photograph on the cover of their magazine. Obviously, a lot of editorial pieces wouldn't really be as effective without the use of photography. And I'm sure that you guys as a photographer will know that, because a lot of you would have shot for editorials, shot for magazines and that kind of thing. And yeah, it's really a very instrumental part of design, is knowing how to use photography in cohesion with the rest of your design work. Shout out Class by Nature, who have just released a zine during this quarantine period, and their examples, which I'll also put on the screen and link in the description, really show how you can use design to make compositions with photographs more interesting. So if you were making a photo book or a zine or something that you had all your photos in and you wanted to make them a little bit more dynamic, add other elements into the image, they do that really well. I would definitely check that out. Something I think you can see when you look at editorial design is really how designers have to utilize composition, negative space, that kind of thing. And that is a skill that photographers have to know as well. When we talk about negative space in photography, sometimes we are talking about literal negative space, maybe like there's a big white area when we're talking about minimalistic, maybe architecture photos or something. But often we're also talking about, is there too much headspace or something like that? Another way that photography and design often overlap is when we're talking about branding. If you are able to create a style of imagery, a style of photography that is cohesive and recognizable to a brand, then that becomes a part of the brand identity. It is as useful and as effective as a recognizable logo or typeface or something like that. A brand that does this really well is Cold Laundry. I will link that in the description, as well as their photographer. I'll put some images up on the screen so you guys can see how distinctive their photography style is. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about the locations they use, obviously the styling, it being a clothing brand. We're talking about the tones and colors in the imagery. When you put all that together, they're really creating a cohesive brand identity. Really, their photography is so representative of their brand. You can see one of the photos from their sets and you know what brand that is, you know what clothing it's representing. Another example is in art direction. So if we take, for example, uses of photography, I guess like we were talking about editorial, but maybe in like album artwork, a lot of album artwork use photos predominantly. If we take the work of Paula Scher, who is an amazing graphic designer and art director, if you don't, you'll know who she is, but if you don't, I will link in the description again. But Paula Scher famously did some album artwork which used really large, like zoomed in imagery. I'll put some up on the screen so you guys can see it. And really all that was the photograph. The photograph was the main part, but it took a designer, it took art direction to kind of put that into a format that was aesthetic, it worked well with the type and helped to communicate a message. That leads me on quite nicely to shared principles, because what I think it really boils down to is that when we talk about graphic design, it's often referred to as graphic communication. And photography does a very similar thing. It communicates visually. They both are encompassed by this idea of we can use color, we can use light, we can use composition, we can use all of this stuff to communicate to our audience. And I think more than anything else that I'm going to talk about from this point on, in terms of shared principles, communication and the ability to communicate is one skill that you will have if you're a photographer or a graphic designer, regardless of which discipline you fall into. But talking about other principles, obviously color. So like I said, I put a video up recently and that video was aimed at photographers, but that information is also relevant for designers, obviously. Knowing how to use colors together, knowing how colors are able to communicate are all really essential skills to have, whether or not you are a photographer or a designer. I don't know why I said that, so like whether or not. When we talk about art direction as well, that's actually how I got into photography. So like I said, I never studied photography. I just wanted to, I wanted to use photos in my work and I didn't want to pay for stock imagery. And that's really how I fell into photography in the first place. Because when you're a designer, being a photographer is, you know, that extra skill that you need, and vice versa, which I'll get onto later. Composition is another very clear similarity between the two disciplines. We can talk about negative space, like I was talking earlier. We can talk about symmetry. We could talk about leading lines and, you know, the ability to draw a viewer into what you want the viewer to be looking at. That is a skill that you need as a designer when you're talking about hierarchy, when you're talking about, again, leading lines, and that's something that you need as a photographer. You'll see it a lot in images that use isolated colors or leading lines. Creating a focal point within design and creating a focal point in photography, really, you know, that they use the same skills. Again, lighting is a key similarity. Understanding how to use warm light or cold light and what they both tell the audience, what they're communicating. And particularly when you're working in fields such as illustration or maybe 3D rendering or something like that, understanding how lighting affects a scene in real life, that's really important. And obviously you guys will know as a photographer, understanding how to use lighting is maybe one of the most important things as a photographer. I'm not just talking about, you know, studio lighting, but natural light and understanding how to work with direct light or where shadows will fall and stuff. That's something that both disciplines will be mindful of when they're creating their work. So onto the real pinnacle, I guess, of this video. How do you as a photographer use graphic design to better your business, to improve your business? I think it's all like well and good and well, is that the phrase? It's all good anyway, to know how graphic design and photography are related and how they overlap and stuff like that. But if you don't actually know as a photographer how you're going to use that to put yourself in an advantage, then it can all feel quite meaningless. So the first thing I'm going to be talking about is personal branding, and you guys will know by now that I do have a full course on personal branding, and you can find that over on Skillshare, and you can get a 2-month free trial for Skillshare using the link in the description. But enough of that plug. I'm talking about branding because branding, when you run any small business, not just as a photographer, is very important. And you might be able to teach yourself graphic design, you might be able to follow this series of videos that I'm going to be releasing and learn a bit about graphic design, but not be confident in building your brand. And that's fine, you know, like designers, go and pay your designers to make you a brand. I'm not saying that you have to know how to create a visual identity by the end of watching all these videos at all. But I think once you have that brand identity that your designer might have designed for you, it's important to know how to use it. And having a better understanding of type and color and how you communicate and composition and layout is just going to help you really put that brand identity to better use, make it look as good as that can be, and really use it to enforce your brand. In a similar vein, when you're posting advertisements for maybe your services or your rates, or if you've got a new video out or something like that, your thumbnails, if you've got a new offer, if you're doing a studio day and you need to advertise them, you can use free tools like Canva, or you can do it all in Photoshop if you want, but really that's not going to help you unless you understand the conventions that you're dealing with. So if you don't understand layout and type, then you can use those tools, but you're not really going to understand how to utilize them properly. As a photographer, understanding design means that you can utilize these tools and make them work for you and your business. And that brings me on to my next point. Something that I really enjoy doing is designing good or clear, concise customer communications. You want your client communications to be clear, to have the right tone of voice, and to maybe be familiar or inviting or professional. However you kind of want those client resources to appear, you need to kind of know how you're going to be able to achieve that. And again, linking back to your personal brand, you're going to want these client communications to be representative of your visual identity. Understanding how to design, understanding how you can communicate certain things and how you can get people's attention in different ways using visual elements I'm really handsy today, is really a great skill. If you're able to, you know, design your media kit or your client PDFs or your rates cards or any of that stuff, and it looks professional and it looks good, then that is just going to step your business up. It's going to set you aside from everyone that is kind of, you know, not producing that. Whether or not a client knows how to make something look good, they'll know whether or not it looks good. And if you're producing, you know, a welcome pack PDF and it just looks shocking, like it's all the wrong colors, the type is too hard to read, it's not legible, it's really uncomfortable, they don't want to read it, that's not going to set a great example of who you are, what services you provide, and how much trust they should have in those services. But if you can present them a really, you know, beautifully made PDF, really, it's concise, it's clear, it looks good, it's communicating the right things, then you're going to set yourself aside from your competition. Similarly, even in terms of your website, you can use all these website builders and stuff, but if you're not really understanding what looks good, it's going to be a lot harder to create a beautiful website without utilizing a web designer. So really this video is just an introduction to the next few videos that I will be talking about. And if you haven't already checked out my video on color, I definitely recommend you go back and watch that. I'll link it up here somewhere or in the description. And yeah, really start nailing the ideas of how you can use colours together, because that is going to be really useful to keep in mind when we move forward through this, you know, mini course as such. Over the next few weeks, we are going to be talking about type, and then we're going to move on to some other fundamentals of design and how you can use them in your photography business. If there are certain things regarding graphic design that you might want to learn, whether you're a photographer or not, drop me a comment, let me know, and we can definitely put that into the program. I definitely recommend subscribing and turning on that little bell if you haven't already, so you are the first to know when these videos are coming out. I'm really excited to bring this new series to you guys. I will be making a playlist on my channel so you can see all of the videos as they come out. I'm going to be upping the output on this channel for the time being to get this series out to you guys. Whilst my homage series is rolling, I will be trying to deliver to you guys 3 videos a week, and then after homage kind of comes to an end, we're going to be replacing that slot on a Wednesday with other material, and we're going to be dropping back down to 2 videos a week. But in the meantime, I am expecting to put out a lot of content for you guys, so make sure you're subscribed. I don't want you to miss anything. Next week we are going to be starting this series, and we are also going to be talking about something else that I can't wait to film. I haven't filmed it yet, but I can't wait to get that out to you as well. As ever, thank you for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next one.